Hello to everyone who's watching this video and welcome to our first session of Talking Politics by Association of Political Science Students at Nazarbayev University. And today's session will be led by Sana Akylbayeva and me, Darina Zhnusova. We both are third-year political science students at Nazarbayev University. And our guest today is Iskander, a specialist in the field of foreign policy and strategy of Kazakhstan, and currently an executive director of Kazakhstan Council on International Relations. Moreover, we know that you, Iskander, had experience working at the Kazakhstan Institute for Strategic Studies, where you were responsible for doing analytical reports on security trends. Dear Iskander, we are extremely happy and glad to welcome you at our very first session of Talking Politics. And how are you doing today?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this session, and I hope our discussion is going to be fruitful and insightful.
Okay, thank you. So all in all, our today's conversation will cover political issues, political trends in Kazakhstan, as well as in the Central Asia as a whole. And shall we start? Okay. The first question that is quite broad. What do you think are the general trends of economic and security cooperation in Central Asia? And does foreign policy in Kazakhstan suit one of the main theories of international relations? Meaning that, can we classify Kazakhstani foreign policy direction as realist or neoliberal or any other that you think fits?
Looking at the trends which are happening now in Central Asia, there is a growing tendency towards regional partnership. And if you look at specifically to the new president's administration in Uzbekistan, which actually gave a new impulse for kind of Central Asian aspect of cooperation. And Kazakhstan for a long time has been promoting the regional cooperation in Central Asia in different terms, in economics, in politics, and cultural and educational aspects. But with the new administration in Uzbekistan, it became a more real picture. And now what we see is that evolutionary, gradually, countries in the region are coming together in different terms. We shouldn't expect very drastic changes in kind of institutional building in Central Asia, but at least we see that between the governments and between the leaderships of Central Asian states, a new narrative that is more positive towards region building, and specifically between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the economic aspect is growing. The trade between the two states is steadily growing, but at the same time, we shouldn't kind of overestimate kind of the broader picture. We still need to work on the kind of technical and kind of those issues that has been were a barrier between our states for a long time. But at this stage, I believe that there is a good opportunity to move forward in this regard. And coming to the general aspect of the regional dynamics, historically, security, specifically security, was the main common ground for Central Asian countries for cooperation, because terrorism, threats, extremism were the main platform for leaders of Central Asian states, where they could gather and have this kind of common understanding of the threat. But at the same time, we see that this kind of security aspect is not solely the only one platform that we can work together. Economy, culture, education becoming more and more important, because population in Central Asia is growing very fast, and the threshold of 70 million people in the region has just been passed. And that's why Central Asian region, as the 5 states, has very booming population, and it's very young. So I believe 30% of the population in the region has come to the age. The average age is 26 or 25. So it's very positive dynamic. So it gives you a perspective that we can build something different from what was in the past. And coming to the specific point when you asked what kind of theory Kazakhstan's foreign policy is attached to, I believe it's quite combined. If you look at the foreign policy strategy, which has been published last year, 2020-2030, the key word in the Kazakhstan's foreign policy strategy is pragmatism. So by pragmatism, I believe it's quite realist in this respect, that we are pursuing our own national interests, and it's okay for any country that has been promoting its foreign policy. But at the same time, being a realist, we understand that by building partnerships and building good relations with all states is very important. In this case, we can be more constructivist in this respect, and by making statements and by values, which is very important in these days. I believe constructivism as an important element of our foreign policy is also part of our kind of global, general, regional, global strategy. But at the same time, liberalism or neoliberalism, where institutions play a very important role, is also part of our some of kind of elements of our foreign policy, because we need partnerships with the different big stakeholders like China, like Russia, US, European Union. And that's why by building partnership with United Nations with all different important platforms, we actually secure our own national interests, but at the same time, we try to be more we try to be inclusive in the global affairs through the constructive, this kind of positive, peaceful initiatives that we're trying to promote. So it's a kind of, our foreign policy is a combination of realism, constructivism, and liberalism in this regard.
Okay, thank you very much.
So let's move to the next question. One of the scenarios of security cooperation in Central Asia that you mentioned in one of your interviews is that Russia is going to have better relations with the West, and all major sanctions are going to be lifted. But what can you say about the current situation? How can this scenario be interpreted with the knowledge that you have about the cooperation that has been happening throughout the last 2 years? And how does that affect Kazakhstan in particular?
Well, the question you ask is actually very relevant in this context, where the kind of the tensions are rising very fast between the main geopolitical heavyweights like US, China, and Russia. So in the scenarios that we presented with my friend and the political scientist, Daniel Kosnazarov, we tried to give a picture on broader kind of 3 different scenarios where typically Russia is being under the sanctions from the West. But at the same time, the second scenario is that the sanctions are going to be lifted because there is a growing Chinese presence in not only in the Central Asia, but in global affairs in general sense. So for US, it's very important to counterbalance China in this regard, and battling with Russia and China at the same time can be very tough. But if you look at the US military and security strategy, they try to portray Russia as and China as a kind of a challenging actors in the region and in global affairs. But in a long-term perspective, for example, Washington see China as a long-term threat or challenge. That is why it's very important for Kazakhstan to kind of secure the long-term tradition of multi-vector foreign policy, but at the same time, it's not very easy when it comes to specific moments. When when Kazakhstan was a non-permanent member at the United Nations Security Council, 2017, 2018, it was for the first time we were selected for this kind of high position at the United Nations Security Council. But it was very challenging at some points, for example, on Ukraine cases or Syria, where Kazakhstan's position didn't maybe went along with the Russian position or Chinese position or US position. So we had to take a side specifically stemming from our own national interests. And sometimes these kind of our decisions could irritate some of our key partners. And it's okay because even in the European Union, France or Germany has disagreements on different issues in economy or partnership, but it doesn't make them feel that they are not a part of the union. So what we are doing is that this kind of rivalries and tensions are a kind of it's a permanent trend, and we will always see the different waves of challenges and tensions between those stakeholders. What we need to do is, I think that we need to be pragmatic and gradual and predictable in our approaches. And it's important to give right messages to our partners that it's in our own national interest, but we respect and we understand your position. So I believe in this respect, we need to be predictable, gradual, and pragmatic when it comes to the great power politics.
Okay, thank you.
So what about, okay, so you said that the way Russia might be affected by the US. So what about Kazakhstani politics in this case? So can we tell that the way US interacts with Russia, it somehow ricochets to the Kazakhstan? So is there like a connection, if you can comment on that?
Well, certainly there is always indirect relations between, if we take into account the Russia-US relations, specifically in economy. The tenge is quite linked to the Russian ruble. So in this respect, we are certainly affected by the way how the sanctions and the bilateral relations between Moscow and Washington is being progressed. So from our side, I believe we need to certainly have different tracks between US and Russia, how to kind of diminish the negative effect of their relations. And I believe this work is being done by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by our government, just to explain that in this case, we are not part of this kind of your fight, but we are being affected in some case. So in any case, we need to prepare and be ready for different scenarios. And that's why I believe case study and scenario-based approach in the foreign policy is very important, because if there is an A, it can be B and C. So we always need to be prepared for different kind of cases and trajectories of different foreign policy, because we are living in this region, and any case, if it comes to migration, kind of labor force, Russia is a very important actor, and we have the 7,000 kilometers border, and we have very big economic exchange. So that's why I believe we need to also explain to different stakeholders of ricochets.
Okay, thank you very much. So besides just being pragmatic and predictable, we also need to be flexible enough.
Yes.
Okay, so the next question is again about the foreign politics of Kazakhstan. So we talked more about the US-Russia. What about such strategic partner as China? How is Kazakhstan cooperating with China, especially during the pandemic? And what scenarios of security cooperation do you see in the future with this country?
China is a very important player, and not only for Kazakhstan, but in the world in general sense. It's number 2 economy, and in different areas, it's number 1 economy. I believe it's very important to have constructive relations, but at the same time, we need to certainly follow our own national interest, and because China as an actor in all of it, has different approaches in the world. So Kazakhstan has been portraying itself as a buckle along the Silk Road in terms of the transport and transit routes, and China is our immediate neighbor. And it's very important to sustain this pragmatic and important relations with Chinese partners. But at the same time, when it comes to the Chinese factor, among the public, the perception of China can be different. So it can be a panda from one side and the dragon from a different side. So when it comes to the land issues, the specific agreements between the governments, we don't usually see what is the content of that agreements. And usually the public can speculate about that, and there's some rumors. And that's why the China is sometimes portrayed as a dragon, so kind of expansionist power. But when it comes to specific goods or economy or trade, where people usually can have some money. And when you buy a Xiaomi or Huawei like smartphones, it's okay. And when, for example, Dimash Kudaibergenov goes to China and becomes famous there, it's okay. I mean, we are applauding that. Or when Jackie Chan is coming to Kazakhstan, it's being applauded. I mean, China has another side. I mean, it's a progressive, fast-growing country with a high level of technology, and that's why I believe it's very important to be aware of different trends which are happening in Chinese government or Chinese foreign policy. But at the same time, we need to have a very good relations and exchange of ideas, because China is becoming a new center of technology. And you need to, when you look at China, for example, I believe you need to understand that 90% of China's economy goes through the maritime roads. So it goes through the sea or ocean. We may comprise maybe only 10 or 5% the landmass, the Eurasian landmass where Chinese goods are passing. Because if you send your goods through the sea or through the maritime roads, it's much faster than going by the land. And in this respect, you need to look at the Chinese foreign policy in the South China Sea or in Asia Pacific. So by looking at China, you need to have a broader picture and look at the different regions, not only what's happening in Central Asia towards Kazakhstan or China goes towards Eurasia, but also what's Beijing vision towards Asia Pacific, or as American or Japanese scholars call now Indo-Pacific. So it's very important to understand that different angles of Chinese strategy, of Chinese foreign policy, that there's a lot of symbolism, and you don't usually look at the real words. So you need to look at the kind of different aspects, the words, because gestures, and in Chinese diplomacy, it's very important. And that's why it's not the black and white issue. You always need to engage with Chinese partners, business, scholars, universities, in order to better understand their position. And when you understand their position and study well, you are able to promote and protect your own positions inside Kazakhstan. So it's a mutual exchange.
Okay. And what about with the coming of pandemic, were there some drastic changes in the foreign policy of Kazakhstan related to China?
Well, I believe the Chinese side has been very active in supporting Kazakhstan in sending their personnel and medical staff to our country and to the Central Asia in the world in general sense. And they have this kind of new term called as healthcare Silk Road, where the mask diplomacy, so-called mask diplomacy, is becoming a new trend. And the pandemic has actually not drastically changed the foreign policy or diplomacy in general sense, but gave us a new terms and gave us new methods of how you operate your diplomatic missions, or how you operate and promote your foreign policy around the world. And for China, it's a showcase that they got an issue, they got a problem, and they tried to transform the barrier to the bridge. So it's a very important aspect when you take your disadvantage and make it as your advantage. So China is trying to promote itself as the forerunner for healthcare in the World Health Organization, etc. So it's very important showcase for how China tried to adapt to the new realities and try to benefit for their own international status.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer.
Now let's move to another strategic partner of Kazakhstan. So taking into consideration your interest in Japanese foreign policy, what can you say about the current economic strategic partnership between Japan and Kazakhstan? So what is the main direction of that relationship?
The Kazakhstan-Japanese relation has been has been steadily growing, and apart from China or Russia, we don't share the border with Japan, and it can be a barrier in this respect. So in economic terms, we have room to grow. Actually, the economic partnership level is near to $1 billion, like a mutual trade level. So it's not so high if you compare to, for example, China or Russia in this respect. In the energy sector and the construction and human resource, human development. Before we were recipient of ODA, Japanese donor organization platform, and now we have moved from the list of the recipients to the list of the givers. So we're not part of the ODA in Japan, but in the same time we have really good relations on the cultural terms, and historically Kazakh intellectuals were following Japanese modernization period in the early 20s, and this kind of the Japanese the romanticism and this attachment to Japan at some point has been following us in specifically in Kazakhstan among the intelligentsia intellectuals from the early 20s of the last century. So in this respect, I believe there is very good potential working with the IT sector and agricultural sector, because where Japan has a very good, strong positions. And if you come to the specifically medical and healthcare issue, I believe we need to work on that and bring Japanese, for example, standards to Kazakhstan. We have like different hospitals, like Korean methods, Turkish methods, Turkish hospitals, etc. But what about Japanese hospitals in Kazakhstan, or kind of training, sending more medical staff to Japan and gain some kind of their knowledge? And on education terms, we have good partnership. We are sending, Kazakhstan is sending a good number of students to Japan, and I believe 80% of them are female students. And from what I saw when I was studying in Japan, so it's an interesting trend. And I believe Asia, in general sense, Asia is becoming a new epicenter, not only in economy or trade, but also in innovative ideas. So Japan, for historically, has been kind of a center of attraction, and has been a model for Asian tigers, for other East Asian countries who benefited from their level of success in 80s, for example. So in this respect, I believe we need to have different models of growth and look at and take the best practices from Japan or from different countries in Asia.
Thank you for your reply, but now I have another question. So we can say that there is an increasing partnership between Kazakhstan and Japan. And do you think that this increasing partnership can somehow affect our relationship with China? Because we know that China and Japan are not on a good terms between each other. So what do you think about this?
Well, I don't believe that these kind of different relations between Japan and China are going to affect us in any case. So if you look at the trade level between Japan and China, between two, and if you look at the different like positions specifically on the historical issues and maybe political issues and geopolitical issues between those countries, they might have some kind of tensions and disagreements between Tokyo and Beijing. But if you look at how many tourists are going from China to Japan, it's very huge. And the Japanese have their own term for Chinese tourists, like spring boom. I don't know the exact translation, but I mean it actually is attached to the now great number of Chinese visitors to Japan. So if you look at the culture, at the kind of tourism, trade, business to business level cooperation between Japan and China, it's very big, and it's not being affected by the politics. But certainly when it comes to certain political issues in a foreign policy, in the history, they have some tensions in this respect. So we need to differentiate always when it comes to politics and when it comes to economy, because when politics is usually pragmatic, and you may quarrel with each other, and you might have you may even ban an ambassador in each state, but the economy will always go, because this is the main source of growth. And if China or Japan loses a economic partner, like Japan or like China, it will be a big hit on the Japanese or Chinese economy. So it's quite pragmatic and win-win approach.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the next question might sound quite controversial. At the end of the last year, several videos got viral with Russian politicians and some lawmakers claiming that northern Kazakhstani land belongs inherently to Russian territory. So this, of course, in turn led to wide media coverage, criticism and discussions, speculations, and even current President of Kazakhstan, President Tokayev, he commented on the case. And how do you think this situation influenced the perception of Russia in Kazakhstan? And is there a way it affected Russian-Kazakhstani relationship?
Well, I think this kind of statement will not affect the real politic or the real relations between Kazakhstan and Russian Federation in any case, but certainly these kind of statements it's not the first statements which were stressed on the media and the government, on official media in Russia. So it certainly created a big discussion inside Kazakhstan, and not only in Kazakhstan, but also in Russia in general sense. So we saw different political scientists or observers who tried to explain what it will mean, what it would mean for Kazakhstan and how it's going to see the Russia in the future steps. But I don't really believe that it's going to really affect the general position between Russia and Kazakhstan. There were different takes on that. The official position of Russia, if it's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it actually stated that it's the only position of specific individual, and we do not agree with that, etc. So there were statements from Kazakh side and by the president himself, who said that it's not relevant and it doesn't explain or doesn't translate the real kind of picture of Kazakhstan-Russia relations, and so it's not the part of the real negotiation or real relations between both sides. But I believe that maybe in some levels of Russian foreign policy establishment, this kind of thinking might prevail. So, but it's a general trend, because you see that even in U.S., in the establishment of U.S. government, there are hawks, there are doves, there are like conservatives, and there are liberals. So they might have different positions specifically on a concrete topic. So what I believe we can learn from this aspect is that depending on their statements, we need to certainly make it much more irrelevant. We need to secure our economy. We need to grow better. We need to make sure that that Kazakhstan will not need any kind of alliances or be part of kind of a union on political terms with any country, because we are a self-sufficient country. So we need to reach this kind of level where people can feel themselves self-sufficient and be confident that their government or their state, our state, is going to be enough and self-sufficient in producing and promoting our good services to the local population. So I may sound like, not as a political scientist or foreign policy expert, but as a local citizen of Kazakhstan, I certainly believe that we need to improve in many cases, in many levels of our governance. So, to make this kind of statements much more relevant than it's now.
Yes, thank you. Because it really was quite specific and quite unexpected to hear that kind of stuff from a strategic partner, and hearing it like from several people. And of course, even if, as you said, it did not quite affected the foreign policy, like did not shape it in another way or something, it still influenced the public opinion, right? And we know that public opinion, especially currently in the 21st century, it's gaining more and more importance. And it's just interesting if sometime in the future, even the foreign policy in Kazakhstan will also be not dependent, but at least influenced by the public opinion of Kazakhstani people.
Yeah, I believe it's very important to maybe conduct a research, public opinion poll, like by different institutions to understand, to grasp the reality, what Kazakhstan is thinking about specifically, what population Kazakhstan is thinking about specifically on, not only about Russia, but also about like our regional partners, about Central Asian states, or our kind of distant strategic partners like US, Japan. So in order to give a real, more objective picture on your question, I think it's important to do a research and have some kind of more facts and data, to gather data specifically on that topic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your response.
Now, let's talk about the relationships with the US. So, you know that this year Joe Biden won elections in the US, and this means that for 4 years the US was run by the Republican Party, and now it is changing to the Democratic Party. And in which way can this influence Kazakhstan's relationship with the US? And is there a possibility that Kazakhstan will be changing its foreign policy in accordance with that transformation? And if so, then how?
Yeah, well, if you look at if you look at the track record between Kazakhstan and US relations, and there were different administrations during the Obama, Bush Jr., and Trump, and now Joe Biden became the real drastic US foreign policy towards Central Asia. It's important to note that last year there was a new US strategy to Central Asia, which has been adopted. And when the former US Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, came to Kazakhstan, and then he traveled to Uzbekistan, he actually stressed 6 important points. 3 of them were related to the Afghanistan, and 3 of them, they were specifically on the Central Asian cooperation, sovereignty, and connectivity. But important aspect that maybe not so much different from the other strategies from US towards Central Asia is that it gives some signals towards regional powers, but not naming it. But they imply it to specifically Russia and China, that it's better to work with US rather than kind of with China and Russia actively in this respect. So I don't believe that we will see a very different US foreign policy or towards Kazakhstan or Central Asia in general sense. And I don't think that Kazakhstan will change its approach towards US in kind of differently from what was before. What can be different is, and what can be have an indirect impact on Central Asia is Afghan factor, because in May, the peace treaty which was signed between US government and Taliban expires in May. And according to this treaty, US troops are going to have to withdraw its own troops from the Afghan soil, or with a limited military staff. But so this is a very important aspect, because Afghanistan has traditionally was a main point, a focal point for US presence in Central Asia. And it's important what was going to happen there. And then we can say that US is going to be much more present or less present in Central Asia by looking at Afghan factor at some insecurity terms. But when you look at the Russia and China and this kind of statements by the Russian politicians towards Kazakhstan, I believe that the sovereignty and independence term, which was very much emphasized in the US strategy towards Central Asia, the US side is going to take this into account much more kind of with a bigger care and attention. And the Chinese growing presence in the world in general sense is a big factor. And that's why they will, it's very important for the US side to understand how China is operating in Central Asia. So it will be a usually indirect kind of format of cooperation when it comes to Russia and China in Central Asia. So we will not have a different stance from US towards Kazakhstan, but depending on the kind of more broader geography, we'll see some indirect signals, and that will be may cause some kind of change in this respect.
Thank you. So now moving on more to global affairs. In one of your last year's interviews on the escalation between the US and Iran, you said that there is a low probability of open warfare as both actors are not interested in such conflict. However, last month, the US attacked some Iran-backed military infrastructure in Syria, which was the first military action that Biden took. And then it was followed by Tehran turning nuclear talks with the US down. So how do you think such actions might affect the already strained relationship between the two?
This is very challenging relations. The Washington and Tehran have going back and forth, signing an agreement, withdrawing from agreements, and I believe it's the moment, the period where they test the ground. Specifically, the Joe Biden's administration would like to see what's happening in the Middle East, and I don't believe that they are now fully prepared to escalate their relations to the new level. It's local conflicts and local kinds of actions. Prepared to test their own strengths, specifically in this area. So in politics or in geopolitics, there's a low probability at this stage of grand war. Usually, what's happening in this kind of context is there are different local wars and local conflicts, which not a long term, but medium term and short term can last for 1 month or for 1 year. And this kind of conflicts can kind of like a fire, or can happen at one place and then go to another. So will be a kind of permanent, I believe this is a very interesting permanent turbulence, which I call it permanent turbulence in the Middle East, which is happening, and where one conflict ends and another starts. And there are different military and terrorist groups which are operating in the Middle East now. And if you look at the Syria, that Turkey has started its own operation in northern Iraq, for example, or Syria, and US is not backing Turkey in different aspects, and it creates some problems for Ankara and Washington, and that is why on a military stance they can cooperate and disagree at the same time. So it's very interesting because there's so much realpolitik in these days, and you can be a friend and foe and friend at the same time. So depending on the context and depending on the topic, your position can be very much different and polarized. So I don't believe that coming to the case between Iran and US, I don't believe that there is a probability for big scale escalation of conflict. And for Joe Biden, he needs to first solve the pandemic issue and secure its kind of labor migration, improve its economy, and the hit which the US economy received from the COVID-19, and then move to more global affairs. I believe it's a matter of timing, and if it's 4 years, maybe this year we will see much more bigger picture, and U.S. government is still waiting for its appointment in key positions, its foreign policy, State Department, or Pentagon. So this is a very kind of important period, but we shouldn't expect much coming to the real contours and trajectory of U.S. foreign policy towards Iran. We need to wait just to see what's going to happen next.
Okay, thank you. And so to wrap up for a bit, the theme of Kazakhstani foreign politics. So we know that in Kazakhstan, it's so important nowadays, this transition from developing country to developed country, and all these plans of like 2050, first 2030, and then Kazakhstan 2050. So what do you think are the things that are done on the foreign policy level in Kazakhstan in order to fulfill these strategic plans and in order to make this transition quicker to the developed countries?
Well, maybe 3 or 4 points I would like to state about, and we need to promote this kind of active neutrality or active multi-vector foreign policy. Before, I believe we had a time just to think and consult about our position in global affairs or regional politics. The timing is the time has really diminished, and we need to take very fast actions and fast decisions. So it will require our diplomats and our government to address those issues much faster than it was before. So activity, be active and flexible at the same time. It's number one. Being able to adapt to the new context. It's number 2. And the third point, I believe we need to increase our business standards, economic standards inside the country. If we would like to attract investors, we need to be more predictable. We need to raise the standards of business operation inside Kazakhstan. So it means lessening the bureaucracy, and increasing the level of decreasing the level of corruption, for example. So it's very important for long-term investors to come to Kazakhstan and say, hey, we can work here for long-term, and the rules of the game are clear. The third point, I believe, or the fourth point, I believe it's increasing certainly the human capital, investing into a human capital and raising the level of meritocracy is very important. There is issue such kind of as a brain drain, where the best and bright minds going away from Kazakhstan to the different countries. And it's okay, it's a global trend, because like Chinese students are going to US studying and working in the Stanford, Harvard, and Silicon Valley, etc. So, but what China is doing, they try to give opportunity inside China, and they are calling the students the best mind back, giving them the necessary freedom of actions. So I believe that investing into the human capital, but at the same time building opportunities and improving meritocracy inside Kazakhstan is very important to secure the innovative ideas. Number five, I believe that, as you mentioned, that everything changes so fast, and our foreign policy and diplomacy has to adapt to this kind of new reality where the Internet of Things, big data, it changes and challenges the traditional way of how diplomacy and foreign policy was operating. With the Facebook, Instagrams, the mass media, the digital diplomacy became a new trend, whereby sending in the right messages through Instagrams and the official account can create a positive dynamic, but at the same time, if it's done not correctly, it can actually damage your image. So it's very important just to be more proficient in the digital sphere of our diplomacy and foreign policy. And when it comes to foreign policy diplomacy in traditional stance, diplomats are the kind of the conventional way of promoting bilateral relations. But at the same time, students, actors, the creative class, our singers, like people of sport, are the new ambassadors of Kazakhstan. And that's why the case of Dimash or Triple G and our kind of new singers are very important just to promote Kazakh culture or Kazakhstan in general sense abroad. So we know that the case of Imanbek, who has this kind of the Grammy or nominee, etc. So it's a big showcase for global labels to come to Kazakhstan and say, hey, there is the big pool of talents, and we need to take into account that there is something here, and how they came to this position. It's very important. We need to study the Kazakhstan case. So it's very important to deviate from the traditional and conventional way of promoting diplomacy between states. It's diplomacy in the end, it's about people. And we need to motivate and enlighten our people about opportunities that are lying in front of them. And this is very important, I believe. And I recommend you to read a book by Tom Fletcher. It's a former British diplomat and ambassador who wrote a book called The Naked Diplomat. And he actually wrote about the new wave of diplomacy, where such countries that Denmark is sending the ambassadors not to the country, but to the tech companies like Google, because Google now has much more power than any state, and it's kind of its budget much bigger than Kazakhstan budget or Russian budget, etc. So the understanding of power and influence in our digital world is changing very fast, and diplomacy, economy, policy making should actually adapt to the new realities. That's why I named as my second recommendation being adaptive, and it's very important just to adapt and knew the spirit of time, where we are living and what we need to do to be successful, at least. So and maybe the last case, which I think is very important for Kazakhstan's foreign policy, is also pay attention to the climate change and ecology, specifically with our strategic location, and since we don't have the direct access to the water or oceans, it's very important to understand that climate change is real and it's affects us all, and we need to secure our those changes and kind of at least diminish the challenges and barriers that can arise in our environment.
Thank you very much for such an open answer.
So Iskander, thank you very much for attending this meeting and having such a great discussion. We believe that it will be both useful and interesting, not only for people majoring in PSIR, but to anyone who's interested in politics. And we wish you good luck in your future endeavors and career. And thank you everyone who watched this video.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And I wish you the great success and in your career. And I believe you took a right choice to pursue your professional stance in the foreign policy, political science, diplomacy. And I believe that more and more students are going to be successful, and female students are going to be successful in the diplomatic career. So I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.